Alright, so this is what it's going to look like when all the extrusions are done. So you've probably seen by now that it works fairly well because of the fact that Max recognizes those closed polylines. So the extrusions are pretty straightforward. You just have to kind of balance your numbers and keep track of what the depth of your extrusions are. The one thing that I did sort of mention there is that I had one other object. I've only got one object in this scene here that was extruded in a different direction. So it was drawn as a separate profile. I just did the same extrusion, and then I just moved it into place here just as one of the vertical steel studs in this little steel stud wall. So once that's all set up, what you'll want to do is you'll want to set up a little bit of texturing, a little bit of lighting, and then the camera view as well. I'll do the camera first. One thing to make you aware of here is just remember the visual styles. You've got F3 is your toggle for going back and forth from wireframe to shaded. And then once you're in that shaded view, if you hit F4, it'll toggle the view of the edges. So if you've just sort of done extrusions in the same sort of general default texture, you might just get this kind of mass of generic gray, and it's hard to tell where one object begins and the next one. And so just to kind of give you a little bit of distinction on screen, just hit F3 to use the shading, and then F4 to give you an edge. And then once you've done that, I would go to a top view, which you can do by just hitting the letter T. And then if you want to just locate, kind of zoom extents, just hit Z. And I would set the camera view up by just going to the Create tab here in the command panel. And then you just click on the little camera icon. And we just want a target light here. So click on Target. Works the same way it does in most other 3D programs. You click once to place it, and then hold down, and then just drag out to point it. So you can see your cone of vision there just to give you a feel for what you'll see in that camera view. I would put the target sort of in the middle of your scene, your set of objects, and release. And then if you find that your cone doesn't quite capture the whole object, like maybe it's cropping it a little bit, as you can see here, just stay in your, keep your camera selected, go to your Modify tab here, and then you can just play around with the lens length. And if you decrease it, you'll see that it gets to be a wider angle lens, which matches what real-world photography would do as well. So I'll just make that a little bit wider, and then if I want to see how that looks, just hit C, which takes you to your camera view. You'll probably notice that it's a little bit low. So then what you can do is you can just use your pan hand here. And if that's still not quite right, you might want to use the dolly camera tool just to kind of zoom out a bit. If you want to orbit up on it a little bit so you're looking at it from more of a sort of higher point of view, just use the orbit camera tool. So that might be all you're after right there. So it's important to have a camera view because you're going to want to be working in other views, playing around with your texture and your lights and everything else. You always want to have a preset view to come back to. So that's what the camera view will do for you. I'll just leave that one as it is. Now with that camera view saved, I can just hit T again. And I'm going to set up a light. So I'll go back to the Create tab, and then I'll access the little Lights tool. And all I want here is just a standard target light. So click on Target Light, same drill, just place it, and then point it. And then you can use your Alt and your middle scroll wheel buttons, just to orbit around a little bit, and then begin to fine-tune this light. I'm going to make this a subtly different light here by selecting the Modify tab. Sorry, I want to select the actual light source here, and then I'll go to the Modify tab. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this from being just sort of an infinitely small little point of light. I want to adjust the source so that it's actually a broader source of light. In photography, you would have like a larger sort of panel of light that gave the kind of softer wash of light instead of just an infinite little point. Just makes for nicer renderings. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change down towards the bottom. You'll see in the Shape Area Shadows section there's an Emit Light From option, and I'll change it from point to rectangle. And then what I'll do is I'll just increase the size. And I made the mistake of not adjusting my units. So that's why you're seeing that this rectangle is taking a long time to sort of get larger here. So eventually you'll see that you've got a rectangular plane that's emitting light, and it's going to be roughly the same sort of scale as your object. And I'll move that a little closer. And the reason I'm doing this is because I'm going to adjust the visual style here so that it shows me the lighting in the scene, and I'm not relying on hitting the render button. If I hit F9 to do a render again and again and again, I'm wasting a lot of time. Max is really good at showing the scene lighting without actually doing a full rendering. So to access that, I'm going to click on Shaded and Edged Faces. I'm going to change the style here to Realistic, and then I'm going to make sure down below where it says Lighting and Shadows that I'm illuminating the scene with scene lights instead of default lights. And also make sure that your shadows and your ambient occlusion are on. Just gives you a real nice sort of sense of what your rendering is going to look like. So as you can see now, as I move that light around, the display there in my work window is reflecting the light from that source. So it's not, so it's giving me some good feedback. So I'll get a reasonable amount of light here, and then I'm probably going to want to have another light. So I'll go to my top view. I've still got that light source selected. I'll hold down Shift and then just click and drag over to the right, and that's going to create a copy or an instance of that light. So this dialog box comes up that asks me if I want to have a copy or an instance. Copy means it's an independent light. Instance would mean that whatever I did to one happened to the other. So they just mimic each other. So I'm just going to go with instance for now. That's probably okay. I want to kind of do similar things to both. And then if I rotate around to a 3D view again, you'll see that I've just given myself a little bit more light to work with. And I'll go to my camera view by hitting C. Now you can see I've got a decent amount of light on there. And I'm getting a good sense for what my rendering is going to look like. So the last thing I'll do just to kind of give this an initial setup is to apply some materials. And it might just be for the sake of illustration that you're not too concerned with doing anything really realistic. Maybe just to sort of make it graphic, you want to just have different colors, and that's fine. If you want to apply materials, there's a few other steps that you have to sort of go through, but we'll just kind of describe the basic situation first. So what I'm going to do for this one is I'm just going to go to, I'll hit the letter U, which will take me out of the camera view, but still leave me in an orthographic 3D view. And maybe at this point I'm just sort of saying my cameras and my lights are good. I'm not going to play around with them anymore. And I, just for the sake of reducing clutter on screen, want to turn them off, or at least not display them. So if you go to the Display tab, you can check Lights and Cameras, and those will now be taken away from the view. And now I want to set up some basic materials, so I'll hit the M button. It'll bring up the material editor, and you'll start to really lose your screen real estate in a hurry here. It'll be a little hard to kind of show you both elements here, but what I want to do is I want to just expand under materials. I'll expand the materials section of the new materials here, and then I'll just access standard and just drag it over here into view so that I can double click on the actual title, change the material, the color. This will just be the really basic level. So where it says ambient, I'll change that to, I'll just make this blue, I guess. As I said, this might just be your approach where you want to just show different colors and not worry about realism too much. So I'll just go with something like that. And now what I can do is I can just click on the node on the right side of this material and drag it to an object like, for example, the concrete. So that's how I can begin to kind of differentiate the objects, just by simple color. Now, if you want to have something a little bit more accurate, like the floor slab there, for example, if you wanted to make it look like it was actually concrete, what you need to do first is you would need to select it and then go to the Modify tab, and then the modifier list, go all the way down to the bottom and apply a UVW map modifier. And what that does is it just tells 3D Studio Max how you want to spread a JPEG or an image over that object and just map it to its coordinates. So you'll see here that if I expand the UVW map modifier and just click on its gizmo, what it does is it'll kind of show you how it's just spread out evenly across that object. Now, it's not going to look any different yet because I still have this sort of generic blue material on there. But what I'll do here is I'll hit M again for my material editor, and I'm going to access some of these other materials in the library. Like, for example, I could go to the Autodesk material library. And if you expand concrete, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of preset concrete materials in there. So maybe I'll just use flat gray 2. So I'll double click on that one. It comes into my view here. And now you can see that it has a concrete map associated with it. And it's also got a bump map. So it's gonna just take this JPEG and just basically treat it like a decal and stick it on the floor slab. And then it's also going to give it a little bit of relief here with this bump map. So whether or not that's the actual one I want, I'm not going to worry about that. It might not be exactly the sort of type of concrete I want to represent. But what I'll do here is, again, I'll just click on the node on the right side and then just hold down and drag. You'll see that red string there. And then as you hover over an object, you'll get a prompt here just letting you know that it's about to drop that material on that object. And then you can release. And it's still not going to look like anything just yet, and that's because we need to do a little bit of sort of fine-tuning on the mapping. So what I'm going to do here is, with that object still selected on the Modify tab, if I go up to UVW Map, now what I'm going to do is down here in these parameters, I'm going to change planar to box, and then I'm also going to deselect real-world map size. So now you can see those orange lines indicate how it's mapping this particular concrete image across the object. And it still might not look like I've done anything yet. And what I'm going to do just to kind of finish off here is I'll click on the realistic and edged faces, and I'll go down to materials, and then I'll just click on realistic materials with maps. And it might just take a minute here to kind of think. It'll load that image up, and then there we go. So now it's loaded in, and I can just kind of orbit around and see that it's taken that concrete image and applied it to that floor slab. So I'll have something a little bit more realistic. So the same process would apply for anything else. If I want to go to the material library here, I'll see that I've got additional options in that Autodesk material library for wood finishes down at the bottom, and I've got glass. So I could expand glass and maybe access just a clear reflective glass here. Double click on it to create that material, and then just drag that maybe to my glass panels here. There you go. Now this one is a little more generic. It doesn't require the mapping coordinates. So there will be some where you're not actually using a JPEG or a raster image to spread across the object. So you won't have to worry about the mapping. You can see from that one, I just basically use the node here and connect it to the object, and it already takes on those glass properties. If you want to check it out, just hit your C for your camera. I'll turn F4 off so I don't see the edges. Now you're beginning to get a little bit more differentiation with the materials. Getting a little closer to the rendering, so as you populate all your objects with the right materials, and eventually you're going to get to the point where you want to do a test render. So to set that up, just hit F10.